All right. Hello, everyone. We are recording. Welcome to this particular installment, the September 25th, 2020 installment of TGI, the greatest indoor reading series, possibly on Earth, possibly in the universe. Who knows what aliens might be doing? My name is Ridge Cresswell. For those of you who don't know me, I am a increasingly job role confused man who does audio things in Queens, New York. And this series has been going since March of this year when something happened. I don't remember what, but something happened that made us all stay inside for a while. So we are all endeavoring to continue to have some sense of community, connection, togetherness, and share literature and art with one another because it feels good. It lets us learn things about each other and ourselves. And really, personally, even if the world was open right now, I wouldn't have particularly anything better to do on a Friday night. So a couple things just housekeeping wise before everything starts. Number one is if anyone is new here tonight or is reading at an upcoming reading and wants to say hi, I really encourage you to use the chat on Zoom. You can always just say hello, or if you have a reaction to someone's work, you like a line in particular, people tend to use it for that, feel free to sort of have a little discussion in there. Second, there's three things. That was one. Two, I'm saying that because I'm going to forget. Two is that if people are interested, the TGI podcast is doing pretty well. It is available at anchor.fm/podcast. And that kind of brings me to three, which is you can also now, as of really yesterday, but basically today, you can head on over to tgicast.com and view a lovely website that has lists of our upcoming events. It has a page for the podcast. It has a bit about us and starting the show. I haven't gotten the YouTube thing integrated yet, but to be fair, I'm not like a web designer. I am just a man who is willing to be mad at Squarespace for hours at a time. And that's really all you need to have a website, is just tolerate frustration. So with all that said, tonight, we have a kind of special themed night, and this is something we're going to be doing a couple times in the coming weeks as well. Tonight, we are featuring readers from Furious Gravity, which is an installation, an installation, a volume in the Grace and Gravity series. It's women writers from the DC area, I believe, or at least that's published in the DC area, and the editor, Melissa Scholes-Young, who previously read on our show, is going to tell you a few words about it before we get going. So I will ask her to unmute, and feel free to introduce the book.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to be here. There's no other place I'd rather be on a Friday night than hanging out with writers and readers, and more importantly, hanging out with Furious Gravity sisters. This is quite a thing we do in DC, and it is really my absolute honor to bring the book to you, to share it with you, and to gather in a space like this and hear from some of our contributors. Furious Gravity is the 9th volume in the Grace and Gravity series. It was founded more than a decade ago by Richard Peabody, who you all know from Paycock Press, from Gargoyle. He's really the DC literary godfather. And he started this series, and then I inherited it from him 4 years ago, and last year we came out with the 9th volume, and I was lucky enough to have Wendy was here. Where did Wendy go? Wendy Besselhan is the nonfiction editor, and she really helps bring this book to you also, and set up readings and gather all of us. Wendy and I collectively read hundreds of submissions that come from women writers throughout the DC area. And this year we chose 50 because the submissions were so incredible, and they all have a theme. We announced the theme, and it's amazing to me how the energy of women writing toward a theme or about, in this case, furious gravity and anger and fuel and response to political environments, and how it brings a collective voice. The book is always much bigger than any part of us. So we published this book in May, and we've been online ever since. This is, I think, our 10th event to gather, and We have many, many more things, good things coming, and we're so honored to be here. It's wonderful to hear the stories, the individual voices, but also to meet new readers on a Friday night and be with you all. So thank you for having us all.
All right, thank you very much, Melissa. I am 50, so we're getting a slice of this, but there's plenty more to go examine in the book. So everybody, there was a link posted earlier, I'm sure we'll post it again, for the book available from Politics and Prose Bookstore, and you can all head over there to grab it. But for now, let us begin with the readings and such. Our first reader, this is, whenever I do that with my hand, you know something bad has happened in my head. This is so funny because before the show started, I was talking about how I have to ask people for pronunciations, and then I immediately forget. This is what always happens. So I'm going to go with Deb Werrlein. Werrlein. Yes, Werrlein. I can't believe it. You told me like a minute ago. I'm so sorry. If that's the worst thing that happens tonight, we are all very lucky. This will be okay. All right, Deb Werrlein is a freelance writer and editor and volunteer literacy tutor. Her writing has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and has appeared in Creative Nonfiction, Lithub, Blue Mesa Review, Literary Mama, and a variety of newspapers and academic journals. She is currently finishing a collection of essays about her childhood in a rural Connecticut town. This piece is an adapted excerpt from her unpublished memoir about academic life called Professor Never. Without any further nonsense from myself, Deb, you can take it away.
Okay, thanks, Ridge, and thanks, Trina, and everybody at TGI for giving us this opportunity. I'm really excited to be here and have a chance to read from my work. So as Ridge just said, I'm going to read from my essay, Fire Breathing Dragon, and this is an excerpt from my unpublished memoir, Professor Never. And just to give you a little bit of context, that memoir is about my academic experience, beginning from my time as an overwhelmed graduate student all the way through to the end with my unsuccessful attempt to find a tenure-track job as an English professor. In between those two endpoints, I spent a lot of time balancing my work doing childcare, taking care of my two kids, and then also my responsibilities as a grad student and a teacher. And because I had the brilliant idea that it would be good to start my family and my PhD at the exact same time. So this essay is about one of my semesters when I was a brand new student teacher while I was still a graduate student. I'm going to kind of dive into the middle here. The worst of my 4 semesters as a doctoral student was the third, when I started teaching. With every day blurring into one, I can only describe the semester as hell. Devils and pitchforks with a fire-breathing dragon bearing down upon me, hell. I alternated 12-hour days spent teaching and attending seminars on campus with long days spent home alone with 14-month-old Connor, who had finally begun to walk. His mobility meant he spent his time searching for gross things to eat around the house, like the mouse poop he found under our couch cushions, or climbing unstable objects like bookcases and ladder-back chairs. I did most of my studying at night. When my student's first paper assignment came due, the fire-breathing dragon knocked me right out of my chair. I tackled the grading with an inefficiency typical of new teachers, taking 30 minutes to grade each 3-page assignment. At that rate, I told my husband, it would take me over 20 hours to grade all 44 papers. Panicking, I drank coffee and graded papers through one Friday night and into Saturday, taking advantage of the fact Steve was home to help with Connor on weekends. I didn't put the last paper into my graded stack until Saturday evening. Afterward, I pushed my chair away from my desk and wandered into the kitchen, where I found telltale signs of the dinner I'd missed: a dried noodle stuck to the counter, a dirty bib forgotten under the high chair. Steve had left a plate for me in the fridge, but I wasn't hungry. My stomach ached and I felt dully nauseous, a sensation I knew well from the days when I developed an ulcer in high school. After popping an antacid, I went to bed, but I only slept a few hours. At midnight, I got up, made coffee, and hit the books again, hoping to read the whole of Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason by Sunday morning. Of course, I failed. I tried again on Sunday night, closing my book and climbing into bed at 3:30 a.m. with 70 pages still unread. 2 hours later, the alarm jarred me into my morning routine, where I popped another antacid, grabbed a caffeinated Dr. Pepper, and wove my car through rush hour traffic for the 1-hour commute to campus, my lecture notes laid open for review on the seat beside me. Each day followed the same race against time. I learned to dread the sight of student folders stacked around my house like pits of hungry quicksand. One night, after an hour spent curled up in a chair grading papers, the words blurred together and my head drooped forward, startling me awake. I raised my eyebrows, opened my eyes wider, and tried to keep going, but I slipped into a semi-conscious dream state, a sort of anti-sublime condition filled with confusion and anxiety about things I couldn't even pinpoint. When I woke, I discovered I'd written in the margin of my student's paper. I discovered the comments I'd written in the margin of my student's paper had devolved into a drunken-looking scrawl before falling off the page. My last legible words were, "Paragraph, the bending red cradle." I erased them, stood up and stretched, sipped my cold coffee and tried again. Later, when the sound of my pencil hitting the floor jarred me from another lapse into unconsciousness, I saw I had written, "Turning curbside transition" in the margin of a different paper. I again erased the comment, then I looked at the stack of graded papers next to me and wondered, were there more? As the weeks crawled past, I yearned for sleep so much I cried. Having lost sight of a horizon where common sense might prevail, I never considered speaking to an advisor or asking for help. I imagined any show of weakness, especially over my status as a parent, would mark me as unfit for a profession in academe. None of my peers or professors had children that they mentioned, so I felt pressure to hide my mothering while proving that I could take the heat. One night at the end of October, I sat in the nursery rocking Connor. He'd woken during the few hours I allowed myself to sleep, and Steve was out of town. I tried not to think about how I'd get through the next day. Instead, I kissed his fat cheek, inspected his pudgy fingers one by one, brushed my lips back and forth across the top of his fuzzy head. In the glowing warmth of his soft body, I let my eyes close for a blissful moment. Then I jerked awake for fear of dropping him. Somehow I made it to November, but the new month brought a surprise draft deadline for one of my seminar papers, another set of student papers to grade, and my brother's wedding. I asked my professor for an extension on the draft so I could enjoy the festivities in Florida, but she refused. I didn't tell her how my stomach hurt, how my head throbbed, or how my life had slipped out of my control. Instead, I flew to Florida for the wedding with my laptop over my shoulder, Connor on my hip, and a sunny, bright smile on my face. Just as I kept my family life quiet at school, I hid my school schedule from my family. At the wedding, I told no one but Steve that I had a paper due on Monday. I knew my parents and siblings would disapprove of the idea that I couldn't take a few days off, but in my mind, they didn't understand what it took to outrun a dragon. When the rehearsal dinner fun ended at 1 a.m., I returned to my room and toiled over my draft, only sleeping for 2 hours. On Saturday, I busted a move on the Congo line, put the chicken in the chicken dance, and sweated on the dance floor way too much to be wearing a dress. At 1 a.m., I hit the books again, huddling in front of my computer until dawn. At home on Monday morning, I chewed antacid tablets for breakfast, then drove to school with the usual Dr. Pepper in my fist. As I rounded the Beltway, the fire in my stomach turned to spasms. By the time I arrived on campus, I sat hunched over the steering wheel in the parking lot. With an ulcer in my past, I should have known better. Perhaps I shouldn't drink caffeine so early in the morning, I thought moronically. During class 30 minutes later, I reached over my head to write something high on the blackboard. As chalk dust wafted down onto my arm, the classroom faded to white, and my ears filled with a loud whooshing sound. I dropped my arm and leaned into the chalk tray just in time to stop myself from passing out. When my head cleared, I sat down and asked my students to work independently for a moment while I got my bearings. Nausea rose in a wave. Then cold sweat erupted from every pore on my head. "Guess what?" I said, my scalp tingling. "I feel terrible. You can all go home." After my students filed out, laughing at their luck, I ran to the bathroom and vomited Dr. Pepper into the public toilet. I returned to my class and sat alone in a student desk in the middle of the room. Shivering, I mopped sweat from my hairline with a coarse brown paper towel, grimacing at its musty cardboard box smell. 5 minutes before my next class, I ran for the bathroom again, but this time, one of my students intercepted me just outside the stall. "How was your trip?" she asked. "Did you survive the plane ride?" I told her it was great. while my eyes darted around behind her for an open toilet. She looked at me more closely. "Are you all right?" she said. Unable to answer, I pushed past her into the closest stall and threw up with the flap of the door hanging wide open behind me. Over the din of my own sick, I could hear doors slamming and the feet scuffling as everyone fled the scene. 5 minutes later, I entered a room full of shocked and amused faces. The student from the bathroom gave me a sympathetic look that said she was sorry to have told. She needn't have worried. Who could resist such gossip? After collecting homework and dismissing the class, I walked across campus to turn in my draft to my professor. On the way, I stopped once to puke in the bushes. Did anyone see me bending over the azaleas in my skirt and heels with the sun shining down all around me? I didn't care. I left my paper in my professor's box with a note explaining why I wouldn't be in class that night. Then I dry heaved in the bathroom down the hall from her office. As my coughing and spitting echoed around the empty chamber, I wondered what was worse, puking in front of your students or puking in front of your teachers. On the drive home, I pulled off the Beltway onto the exit ramp, fell onto my knees in the thin brush, and heaved again as the cars sped past. And the noise of the traffic, I thought, thank God I finally have some privacy. When I arrived at home, I told Steve I was sick and fell into bed, where I slept for 10 blissful hours right in the middle of the day. The message from my body was clear: slow down. So I tempered my schedule for the final few weeks of classes, but of course, if a fire-breathing dragon is after you, the pursuit can't end without some kind of explosion. When my radiator blew up on the drive to turn in my second of 2 final papers, Steve had to rescue Connor and me from the side of the Beltway in rush hour. On the ride home, Steve and I worried together about the cost of car repair and towing, but inwardly, I couldn't stop thinking of my triumph. Not only had I managed to turn the paper in on time, I had survived the semester with my hope of earning a PhD still alive. Thank you.
All right, Deb, thank you so much. Wow, that is, so first of all, a brief apology. One thing that happens as we get somewhat more known is that teenagers think it's funny to come into Zoom things and try to mess it up. So if anyone noticed any offensive language in the chat or that guy who tried to unmute himself, that's all that was. Don't worry about it. Anyways, other than that, you know, what a vivid depiction of I guess, for lack of a better term, like burning yourself out. I mean, I think everybody comes up against it at some point in their life where they're just taking on too much, but obviously having, you know, having to balance this rigorous academic endeavor, a teaching schedule, and then also, you know, having a child, like that is an it's an unbalanceable triangle, right? Like you can't make that an equilateral triangle. It's going to pull you in different directions. And these profound physical symptoms of stress and long-term stress, you know, really are the result, at least in my experience, and maybe I think this is part of what your piece was about, is it's a result of ignoring the sort of earlier signs. Like we get the earlier signs, like maybe we get anxiety, we get sweaty, we get a rash or something. We're like, oh, that's weird. I don't know what that's about. I'm not sleeping great. And then eventually your body's just like, you know what? I'm going to have to make you start puking because I don't know what else to do to get you to slow down. So have you reached a point now where you feel like you have a better handle on balance? Did it take, I guess the question is, do you think that balance can exist within like the academic model that it exists in now?
I think that it can balance, you can find that balance if you ask for help. And I think, you know, I just read a portion of the essay, but ultimately that was the message, was that I needed to ask for help. I was trying not to tell anybody how hard it was. I didn't tell my family, I didn't tell my professors. And we all need help at some point, right? And if I had just, you know, been more willing to reach out and not feel like it was my first son, my first child, and he was only a year old. So I was new at being a mom and thinking that I needed to be able to do it all by myself.
Right. So it's sort of this, and I think, but that's also true for people who are early on in, you know, an academic career or any job. It's hard to say like, you know what, actually, I don't know if I can take all this on, because you want to say yes, 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 yes. So I can see that. Well, anyways, so your memoir is currently unpublished, but parts of it are available. Is the memoir, is it content from the memoir that is in Furious Gravity?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
this is an excerpt of a chapter.
Okay, excellent. Well, people go there to find out more about how academia is not just wearing a velvet blazer and sitting in an old room full of books, because it's not. At any rate, our next reader is Hildie S. Block. She is a proud member of Generation X living in Arlington, Virginia, with her husband, 2 kids, dog, cat, and an axolotl named Zippy. She leads writing workshops around the DC metro area and has published over 50 short stories in places like the Cortland Review, Gargoyle, Porcupine Literary, Defenestrationism, amazing name, and Literary Mama. Her book, Not What I Expected, came out in 2007, and her Kindle single, People, is available now on Amazon. Without further ado, Hildie, you can unmute and take it away.
I can unmute. I'm unmuted. Yay. I'm still reeling from Deb's reading. I was there. I did those things. I remember when my now 21-year-old was 0, 1, 2, and 3, and I was teaching American. And when she learned to talk, she started calling AU the paper store, because everything was the whatever store, right? Because we lived near the Italian store and the German store, so of course everything was the blank store. But she called it the paper store because I was always saying, oh, I just have to run in and drop off these papers, or oh, I just have to run in and copy these papers. And so she was so used to being toted along and being told it was the paper store. Anyway, and a funny story from Melissa is that she would, when she got to be about 4 and we moved over to Patel, she'd go with me into the copier room and she would make some kind of art out of the Post-it notes and tape and staples and things, and then present it to John. And he pretended to like it. All right, so I guess I'm reading my story that appears in the anthology called Cinderella. And this was, well, Melissa, I don't believe you. This is a story that came, you know what, I'm going to let it talk for itself. Well, let's speak for itself. All right, so Cinderella. It's times like this when you wish you could give Sleeping Beauty a call and see how things are going with her. But after that last time, you know better. She was less than forthcoming. Married life's not all that bad, she said, between sighs of happiness. If it is, you should leave, she says with an invisible smirk of superiority. She's pregnant and happy. Ever since you rode off into the sunset with Prince Charming, happily ever after just hasn't been what you would have thought a fairy tale life would be like. Okay, so here's your new reality. Yeah, sure, you have money, but you're not used to that, so it's harder than the other stories would have led you to expect. Every decision gets thought and rethought. You have no idea what's too much to pay for something anymore. You stand in a store and you can't make the simplest decisions. You come home from work and you make dinner, and yet it's never good enough, never fast enough, or just right somehow. Funny, it was always just fine before, but suddenly, even when you make the thing you've made before and he'd said he'd liked, well, now suddenly it doesn't. And it's not like you would have made it again, except that he'd raved about it. But this time he says, it's different, even when you show him the box. It can't be different. It is, he says, and that's the end of it. No quality control. You've failed again. You clean together every weekend. You dust, he vacuums. He complains about your strays, those long hairs getting twisted between his toes in the carpet, which you're pretty sure isn't even possible. You fight anytime you assert yourself, which seems very wrong. But your evil stepsisters are so jealous. He's the perfect guy. You have the perfect life. You got the glass slipper. Glass slippers hurt like hell, you want to tell them. Ever wear one? But you dare not complain, because even if you try, they refuse to listen. They tell you that you don't understand. You can't remember being single. They hold up their stop sign of a hand. Someone tells you that the first year is hard, so you try to believe it and pray for the strength to see an anniversary. You miss your evil stepsisters. In their jealousy, they've become more evil than ever, but you envy them, their camaraderie, their bond. So you do it again. You try out a new dinner. He complains about the number of dishes that get dirty from the preparation. He talks to you when you're on the phone as if you are not, as if he has a permanent audience with you, which is true. You can't stand the way he changes the channel all the time. Turns the TV off without asking, you shake your head. Once the TV's off, you go up to bed. You try to ignore the fact that he takes as long as he needs in the bathroom, yet rushes you. What are you doing in there? Taking out my contacts, you think out loud. Slitting my wrists, you think silently. With the most expensive razor blades they sell at Giant. The thought, surprising though it may seem, makes you smile. What a big kid, you think. What a big spoiled kid. My big spoiled kid. You change your mind about a lot of things and put in your diaphragm. And when you get into bed, he comes over to you, holds you, kisses you, thanks you for putting up for him, promises to try harder. Happily ever after, you think.
All right. Thank you so much, Hildie. That was, someone commented, I think Trina actually commented in the chat that she loves subverted fairy tales. And I think I do too. And I think one of the reasons it's relatable for everyone is that part of, I don't want to say part of growing up, because that sounds like you're just accepting something as you age, but it's more like part of understanding the reality of the world is realizing that all those tidy little, tied in a knot bows that are supposed to define your life, all these events and all these changes are, it's not necessarily they're worse than you thought they would be. They're just completely different. They're completely different, and they're much more complicated always, right? So I think actually just the name of your book, Not What I Expected, I feel like that could apply to so many events in life. like whether it's a birth, a death, anything like that. So I guess is this the question I want to ask you is going back to these things that may be fairy tales, for example, or Disney movies, whatever, things that were like promised to us as particularly American children, that like things will just keep getting better and better, and then you'll be the chosen one and everything will be great all the time forever. Is going back and sort of investigating this, is this something you've done a lot of, or is this sort of a one-off?
Well, I'm not a huge fan of Disney, and I didn't really grow up seeing those fairy tales, although luckily for my dark gothic grim outlook on the world, I had an original book of Grimm's fairy tales from like better. The 20s or something. Mm-hmm. They were a lot darker. But and that's not original, obviously, 1800s, but sure. They'd be in German and I can't read Corrector. But I can try. I've definitely written some other fractured fairy tales. I think that what really influenced this piece was, at the time when I met my husband, and things fell into place rather quickly, and we didn't get married for a long time and stuff, but that there were some friends of mine who wanted that more than I had, and they were mad at me, and I had no one to talk to about the stupid little things because I was supposed to be so happy. And so it came out that way, and he really isn't that horrible, and he's still here, and we've been married 25 years. But I know he comes off terrible in this, which is why he's not here tonight, because there's no reason for him to see the story. But yeah, so it was just this time period where I think I was probably right around 30, and all my friends wanted to get married, and I didn't particularly want to get married, but I met this great person, and things were happening really fast, and my friends were mad at me, and I just felt like they thought that being in a relationship was something really different than it was, and that's how that happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. That's the I'm sure to your single friends, it was like, well, you've achieved the goal.
Right.
Like, you're done now.
Right.
Why would you be upset? And, you know, it's the classic of other people comparing, people basically comparing their insides to other people's outsides.
Right.
You know, like,
right.
So anyway,
And
that's
I wasn't particularly upset. I just,
yeah.
you know, it was kind of like when I started teaching, actually. My friends were all really mad at me when I got a gig really easily teaching college. Not tenure, mind you, you know, just an adjunct position. But they were just like, wait, you were in grad school, weren't you? I didn't even notice that was going on. And now you're teaching, and I'm not going to call you professor. That's not going to happen. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, you know?
I think
but at the same time, they weren't there for my traumatic first year. And as you can tell from Deb's piece, you know, you're writing too many comments on things, and you're falling asleep on the papers. And my cat used to like to spread out on them. Like, I'd have them on the dining room table because I'd have to grade when my child was sleeping. And I started teaching in 96. I didn't have like a 99, but like later, you know, the cat, you know, I'd be grading at 3 o'clock in the morning, and my papers would be all spread out on the dining room table, and the cat would decide that's the perfect place to sleep. And I'd be like throwing them on the floor. And yeah, that's totally.
Yeah, I mean, it's finding your place in the world is always full of stress. And it's funny because while you can count on your friends for support to some extent, you can also count on them to bring you right back down to size. Like, just by accident, they'll just, because
Sure.
Oh, it's rough. Anyway, well, thank you so much for sharing, and
Thank you.
look forward to hearing or reading more from you. I think Noli put the link to your Kindle single in the chat, so people scroll back and get
great. Yeah, that's a fun one if anyone wants to hear it. It's only $1. Go read it. It's really fun.
Perfect. No excuse not to, people. All right, thanks, Hildie. All right, our next reader tonight is... let me make sure I know where she is on the camera. There she is. Hello. Susan Bucci Mockler. Her poetry has appeared in the Maximum Tilt Anthology, Pilgrimage Press, Crab Orchard Review, Poet Lore, the Northern Virginia Review, Gargoyle, the Delmarva Review, the Beltway Poetry Quarterly, the Cortland Review, the Paterson Literary Review, Lunch Ticket, Voices in Italian Americana, and the anthology My Cruel Invention, among others. She is the author of Noisy Souls, a chapbook of poetry, and teaches writing and literature at local universities. She lives in Arlington, Virginia with her family. You should be unmuted, Susan. You can take it away.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much. And this is quite a thrill to be here and an honor. And I love the two previous readers. I can relate to both of them. And Hildie, I'm going to tell a little story about you. Hildie and I worked together before we both started teaching at a job in DC, a nonprofit science organization. I mean, years ago. And then we just keep running into each other in various places. So it's really kind of funny. And we both live in Arlington now, and our children went to the same high school, or yeah, funny. Anyway, so as you know, you heard in the bio, those were all poetry publications. So I am a poet. And so this essay that's in Curious Gravity is my first published essay, which so I'm really excited about that. And hey, Johanka. It's so nice to see people that you know, you just see their faces. And so it's pretty exciting for me to have, and the way that it came about is that I share an office where I'm teaching, one of the places where I teach, and the person is a fiction writer, the person I share the office with, and she said, oh, you should submit to this collection of fiction and nonfiction. I said, well, I don't write that. I just, just write poetry. And she said, oh, well, you should submit something. So I was looking, I have taken some classes in nonfiction, and so I had some drafts of things. So that's where this came from, so I submitted it. So anyways, it's called Suspended. 10 minutes into my Psychology 101 midterm exam, I was trying to eloquently define the differences between the id, the ego, and the superego. Clearly, I should have studied more. The girl next to me, Lorraine might have been her name, poked me on the arm. I thought she was going to let me see her test paper, but she pointed to the doorway of the classroom. My roommate, Lana, was out there gesturing for me to come out. Whatever she wanted, I knew it was bad. She and I weren't what you'd call friends. We tolerated each other well enough, but the knife she slept with under her pillow made me wary of her. Her aunt had sent the knife with a birthday cake. Lana was a sleepwalker. I was afraid she'd sleepwalk and stab me, mistaking me for an intruder. Eventually, I convinced her to lock the knife in her trunk. I really was afraid she might kill me in her sleep. When I went out into the hall to see what she wanted, all she said was, "Your mom called. Your dad had a heart attack. He died this morning." All I said was, "Okay." She and I walked back to the dorm together. I'm pretty sure I was in shock. What I was thinking about was that I couldn't imagine what that morning must have been like for her. How do you tell a person you know is afraid you'd kill her that her father is dead, all just because she happened to be in the dorm room to take the phone call from my mother? After a couple of tries and busy signals, I got through to my mother. She told me my dad had gone out for one of his early morning drives and was having trouble breathing, so he came back home. My brother was still home on his spring break and drove him to Dr. Pixley's office about a half-mile from our house and helped him into the examining room. 40 years later, my brother still talks about the sound of that gurgle, the death gurgle, the last breath gurgle. It was Easter Monday. I had been home for the weekend and had gone back to college on Easter Sunday afternoon. My dad hadn't felt well on Easter and had to lie down after dinner, which wasn't like him. I should have known then. I should have stayed. But I had an exam the next day, so I said my goodbyes, made a ham sandwich for my dinner, and left that afternoon. After talking with my mother, I had several hours before my sister would pick me up. Enough time to pack, let my professors know I'd be missing classes, and then wait. During that wait, I knew that something in my world had shifted, but I didn't know what, and I didn't know what to feel, even though I'd been rehearsing this moment in my head my whole life. My father was 54 when I was born, so we lived with the possibility of exactly what happened that morning. I felt nothing. It seemed as though I was in a movie. How was this happening? What was happening? When would I wake up? I sat in my dorm room and stared out the window at the sky. It was all I had in that moment. I remember thinking, I need to remember this, exactly how this sky looks this morning. This sky this morning when my father was alive and then he was not alive. The clouds seemed to be suspended with nothing holding them up. They were white and puffy. Were they cumulus or nimbus? I could never remember which was which. I needed to remember. It was March. There was snow on the ground. The sky was bright blue. I almost forgot for a moment. Then, oh yeah, he's dead. Everything will be different now. I needed to understand. Maybe he'd show me his face one last time in those clouds. Maybe I'd see him rise from the dead into the clouds, becoming part of the story I'd be telling over and over for the rest of my life to anyone who would listen. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, Susan, thank you. Excuse me. I really appreciate the how do I put this? I don't know if there are things that are universal to the experience of loss, but I definitely identified with a bunch. I remember, I guess just over 6 years ago, sitting on the Metro North train from New York to Connecticut. Because my father had finally called, my mother had been sick and she'd been in the hospital. My father finally called me and was like, I think you need to come home. And I remember that exact feeling of like, this is so important. Like, I need to remember this. I need to understand this. And like trying to like, I remember sitting on this, you know, at that, they replaced the trains like the next year, but at that time, you know, the Metro North trains that have been there since the 70s with like the red vinyl seats and just being like, I need to get all the details into my head. What is this, you know? And and then that thought, you know, that occurred over and over again of like, with the realization that it happened, this actually happened, and sort of like, you maybe, you know, in the future, not forgetting, but just sort of not understanding for a second. And then all of a sudden it like happens again. You know, these are really immensely real experiences and immensely potent, guess, for lack of any other term, just, and especially what you said at the end there about the story you're going to tell for the rest of your life, thinking about it that way just does ache in a very particular way. I think, what's interesting is that when you said, you're usually a poet and you're writing an essay, I kind of, if I'm honest, expected, maybe more metaphor, more, I don't know, like more, but like the plainness and straightforwardness of your language also just really drives it home even further because, yes, there are feelings and yes, you described them, but there is just this matter of factness about the experience. And obviously, so did you write this just to submit it to Furious Gravity?
I'd had it as a draft, I think. I mean, I was in the graduate program at American pretty recently also. So within the past 3 years or so.
Okay.
In a nonfiction class, I wrote it in there. So it's not that old, but I did do a little bit of revision on it just to submit it to Furious Gravity at the suggestion of one of my friends who's also published in here. She's not here tonight, I don't think, but so that's how the writing community works. I mean, that's great. It's like she just kept saying, well, you should submit something, and I kept saying, but I don't write fiction or nonfiction. I write poetry. I'm trying to get the poetry published. So that, yeah.
Well, that's the only reason I guess I ask is like, clearly, this is something you've thought about a lot, and this is, an experience in your life that really defines a lot of things. That's just how it is. But just I guess what I was wondering was whether or not this was something that, like, a story you have been attempting to tell for a while, but it sounds like it was more when you got into a class that asked you to write maybe creative nonfiction, you took an experience that you already had a deep connection to, I guess.
Well, it's really interesting of what you said in your comments about that you had a similar experience on the train of just feeling that need to remember. Because I think that idea has popped up in I don't know if it's essays that I've written, in these classes, or if it has come in poetry, but having to remember like what it looks like outside, what is going on. And also it's kind of interesting is like what I had to eat that day for some reason. It's part of like, I can tell you what I had to eat at funeral, the funeral afterwards, but I couldn't tell you what probably I had for dinner last week or something, but I can tell you what I had at those really, or at a wedding, really important moments, like the food, the day, like what the weather was like. For some reason, there's a need to hold on to them, like to try to make them real, as you were saying. But that was interesting.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and we'll have to have you come back at some point and read the poetry as well. That'll be the next thing we'll do.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. All right, our next reader this evening is Shelby Settles Harper. She is a writer, art enthusiast, and sometimes lawyer. Shelby is a citizen of the Caddo Nation, an Indian tribe located in Oklahoma. Her vices include Twitter, Tex-Mex, and country music. Shelby is the founder of, of all the things I should have asked you how to pronounce, I'm just going to go for it. Cockadoni? No, she'll do it in a second. It's a literary project that I'm sure we can get a link to. An entity that partners with tribes to put books and other reading materials in the hands of young people from reservation communities where public libraries are not readily accessible. Extremely good cause. Her published writing can be found at her website, which I will paste into the chat. And Shelby, you can unmute yourself and take it away.
Thank you. Thanks, Trina and Ridge, for this platform. And thanks, Melissa, for your work in creating this anthology. This is a flash fiction that I wrote a first draft in 2013, I think, and wrote a draft or two and couldn't get it right and set it aside. And then last year I took a flash fiction class with Tara Campbell, And so I, was looking for some old things on my computer to try to rework. And I pulled this one out and reworked it. And then when it was time to submit to the anthology, with the anthology being called Furious Gravity, I changed the gender of the narrator to female, and everything just sort of fell into place. So, an open letter to a dead man. It's a nice corner office, not the kind of space usually given to an associate. When it was first offered to me, I couldn't believe my luck. Actually, I didn't credit luck. I assumed the decision to give me a 180-degree view of the city, including the White House lawn and the National Mall, was because of merit. Like you, I'm a Yale law grad. I too was editor of the Law Review and clerked on a federal court, though I beat you there. You clerked for the Second Circuit, while I clerked for the DC Circuit, the feeder to the Supreme Court. I've heard whispers that everyone found you arrogant. The same has been said of me, but it seems doubly troubling for people, given my gender. The office sat empty between you and me. Sometimes when lawyers from the firm's other offices visited, they used it, but that was temporary, just for the day. I heard one of the firm's tribal clients sent a medicine man to smudge the room. It must have been devastating to get the news that you were being let go. Does that sound better than being fired? You were mid-60s, the age my dad is now. Could you not imagine what you would do next, how you would start over? Did the cold bottom line priorities of the law firm disgust you? Or was it just a crushing final blow to your ego? I found out what happened after I'd been at the office for a few months. It was the night of the firm's Christmas party, and one of the secretaries approached me at the bar where I had just ordered a Maker's Mark over ice. I know you too liked bourbon. I recognized the secretary, but didn't know her name, just that she worked for one of the partners in the labor and employment law section. She slurred her way through some pleasantries and then asked how I liked my office. Tell me what you know, I said to her. She said the firm had been generous with you, had offered you 6 months' salary and use of the office to find new employment. That it wasn't personal, it was the downturn in the economy in 2007 and the fact that there wasn't much demand for lawyers with your specialty. She said on the last day in the office, your electronic card clocked you entering the parking garage at 6:02 a.m. That your elevator card had you going straight to the garage, straight from the garage to your 9th floor office. That you were alone that morning. The next person wouldn't arrive until 7:45 a.m. That it was your secretary who'd found you and let out a scream heard all the way from the law library. That you'd put a gun to your head and pulled the trigger right there at your desk. One final act of pure screw you to the firm you'd given 17 years of your life. She said your out of office message was especially disturbing. After this morning, you'd written, I cannot be reached. Please contact my assistant for help with all matters. That another partner, shaken from what he'd seen, had been the one to call the IT department and have them take down your email before reporters saw it. If those were your 2 final actions, what else did you do that morning? Did you eat breakfast? Review your insurance policies one last time? Send special emails to your wife and kids? Did you pray? I think about you a lot, especially when I'm working early in the morning before dawn. You might have seen a beautiful sunrise on your last day in the office. I hope you did.
Wow, intense, Shelby. That was great.
Thank you.
Really intense. I mean, it's interesting. There were a few comments in the one comment particularly. I think Melissa said that timestamps always create tension. It's true. Like as soon as you said, I was sort of following along, and then as soon as you said a time, I was like, uh-oh, something weird's gonna happen. but the way of sort of revealing it, and then also tying it into this argument about gender inequality in the workplace, right? Not argument, fact of gender inequality in the workplace. Because there's a tension in there in itself of the myth of meritocracy potentially being a reason that someone might take their own life if fired. Because there are lots of people who believe, well, I deserve this, right? And so there's this undercurrent of sort of, how do I say this? Undercurrent of the underlying myth existent in particularly American corporate culture, mixed with what it does to human beings, which, not that your narrator's especially unsympathetic, but she doesn't seem especially disturbed by this man's decision to kill himself, right?
Yeah, I think it's for her, it's more the eeriness of what happened in this office space before she got there.
Yeah, and I love the mention of having somebody come in to smudge the office, like, you know, clean. I actually, this is kind of off topic, but I actually know someone who bought a condo in Texas where the previous tenant had killed themselves. And there was this sort of like sense of like, we need to do something, because just that knowledge of something like that happening does cast a pall over everything, even, you know, something we think of as either benign or pleasant, like a corner office with a great view of the sunset or whatever. Now I have to, I'm going to assume this story is not based on personal experience. Sometimes I go to that question, but frankly, it's lazy of me. But I'm wondering though, if your experiences in the world of, say, law, I guess I'm wondering about the phrase "sometimes lawyer." I guess, did you find that whether it was issues based on your gender or just the corporate sort of grinding people up vibe, was that something that contributed to the sometimes part?
Oh,
you can
maybe.
also, okay.
I mean, it also feels like in Washington, D.C., if you're not working 60 hours a week, you're, you know, part-time lawyering. But it's mainly just for work-life balance. I work 32 hours a week as a lawyer, and then I want to have time for writing and going to museums and hanging out with the kids and
sure, all the things that if we maybe thought about it more, we would just call being a person, right?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate of the 4-day work week.
I agree entirely. I think that's great. And I think that actually that's something that has come up repeatedly too, is especially early on, you know, whether it's your character clerking for a judge or whether it's the other writers who mentioned their early experiences in academia, you know, this theme of sort of, why do I have to spend so much energy making it look like I'm doing stuff all the time by literally doing stuff all the time? So I think that's awesome. That's very worthy. And then I did want to ask really quickly, the literary project. First of all, how I bungled the pronunciation very badly, I'm sure. Would you mind telling us what it is?
Sure. So it's called Gekitani Literary Project, and Gekitani is a Caddo word meaning to harvest or to gather. And so I had this vision of harvesting young minds by sharing books and the possibilities of, you know, because literature can take you so many places. And my cousin, who's also Caddo, was working on a reservation doing legal services a number of years ago. And we visited, and I just became aware of how there are so many places where people don't have access to public libraries. And growing up, I was at the public library weekly, and books are important to me. And so I just want to do something that puts books in the hands of kids who live on reservations and don't have access to. So it's at the beginning stages, putting together an advisory council, this will be a project under a nonprofit so that we can just do the work and use their existing structure. But it's coming along, and I'm excited for it. And it's so you don't have to remember how to spell the name. It's the website is nativekidsread.com.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, that's such a good, I mean, access to any sort of education, or even if you just want to call it, entertainment or edification, access to the same things is a really important thing in terms of creating an equitable, attempting to move our society towards an equitable situation. So that's a fantastic project. Please keep us posted about that. And thank you so much for sharing your work.
Thank you.
All right. We are doing excellently tonight. Is that a word? Maybe. Is excellent an adverb on its own? These are the thoughts I have. Our final reader tonight is Julia Rocchi. She writes prose, poetry, and prayers. She holds an MFA in writing fiction from Johns Hopkins University. Most recently, she's published stories in Furious Gravity, Volume 9 of the Grace and Gravity Anthology series, and Dappled Things. Julia won first place in the Saturday Evening Post's 2018 Great American Fiction Contest and was a semi-finalist for Ruminate Magazine's 2018 William Van Dyke Short Story Prize. Other stories, essays, and poetry have appeared in JMWW, Bourbon Pen, Three Elements Review, Reflex Fiction, Mulberry Fork Review, Ekphrastic Review, and others. Julia blogs about young adult spirituality at her website, which is in the chat right now. It's juliarocchi.com, and she lives in Arlington, Virginia with her family. Julia, you can unmute and close us out.
Right. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. So this, clearly, this is not my first publication. This is my first time this year getting to participate in a Furious Gravity reading. So really excited to join fellow writers here tonight. My story, Egg White, covers the exact opposite end of the spectrum from Shelby's story. Even before birth, it's going to be about conception. So we're going all the way back to the beginning. And this story as well, I think Tara Campbell should start getting commissions, because this story also came about in her online flash fiction course summer or two ago. It feels like eons ago, but that's because we're in the after times right now. So this is my story, Egg White. And DC people will recognize the poorly and thinly veiled reference to the DC metro system. Purple Line, Little Falls, 2 minutes. 2 minutes to race through the turnstile and down the escalator. 1 minute to sidestep the clueless rarely rides who block you on the left. The train groans from the mouth of the tunnel, brakes laboring, and you know you have less time than you thought, more like 20 seconds, to shove through the undulating crowd and reach a car, any car, all sardine packed at rush hour, with enough space for your amped up body and 3 boxy work bags. That's all you need, a slender column of air you alone inhabit for 15 minutes so you can reach home in time, so you can procreate. Bad enough that you discovered the creamy egg white, that jarringly culinary shorthand for fertile cervical fluid, after lunch in the smelly bathroom at work where at least 3 of your colleagues regularly suffer gastrointestinal distress. Bad enough that when you texted your husband this blessed news, your words stabbed by a juvenile number of exclamation points, he was in the middle of presenting the annual budget to his team and couldn't answer you for 45 excruciating minutes. Minutes where you sat as still as you could in your lopsided desk chair, feeling yourself grow more slippery and receptive and parental by the minute. Finally, he replied, "I'll get home as soon as I can. 6 p.m.? You glanced at the clock, 1:47 p.m. Sure you can't do 5? The 3 typing dots blinked for a long minute. I'll do the best I can. See you at home. Hashtag baby dance. how you hate that term, that asinine puerile reference to conception popularized by the best-selling pregnancy series you can't escape in any bookstore, peer's home, or Amazon search. Taking an act of love, passion, commitment, evolution, and reducing it to a giggly euphemism as if adults can't handle actual scientific terms. You feel the same about the phrase egg white. It's too recognizable, too common, too likely to show up in your Southwestern breakfast omelet. Cervical fluid makes you feel more mature, as if knowing and naming the biological activity affords you control over it. Cervical fluid, fertilization, zygote, fetus, infant. Say the words enough, and they must, appear as promised. You repeat the words under your breath now. Each syllable drops within the dry ka-chunk of the approaching train. The slipperiness abated somewhat in the afternoon, but you sense the lingering coolness beneath your skirt when the train whooshes by, and you pray it will suffice. The train stops in front of you. Doors chime open. No one gets off. There is no space, even as you strain and push against the wall of bodies blocking you. Some baleful riders avoid your eyes. Others glare at your insistence, relating without words how you are not above the constraints of rush hour, no matter how desperate you consider your situation to be. Within seconds, the doors slide closed, and the thin but firm membrane shuts you out. Purple line, Little Falls, 8 minutes. Your fury contracts as you watch the train recede into the tunnel that could be leading you toward a different future, a longed-for path. Around you, disgruntled people gather to wait. Everyone has some place to be, but you have someone to create. Thanks.
Wow, thank you so much, Julia. First of all, I love the tone. As I think you were here for before the show, I am a fan of very dry humor, and they're just word choices alone. You used in referring to the train, I think the doors closing maybe or pulling out of the station, something contracted, like even just in terms of word choices in there, it was perfect. And you know, it's actually in some ways, similar to some other things we heard tonight in terms of there are these events that you will imagine before they are happening to you or before you're participating in them will be a blessed, wonderful event. I'm sure conceiving a child, we would all think when we were younger that it would be a mood lit room, maybe like a dim red or something. I don't know, candle lit or something. And then in reality, it's, my biology is telling me something. I have to get home. And that makes my rush hour commute even more annoying than usual. So I think it's excellent, super evocative. I had never been exposed to the egg white term. And I would count myself, I had a better life before you told me. I'm kidding. No. But this is the kind of things that's interesting because these are to some extent, not to bring it all the way to the most serious, but to some extent, these are the biological things that are kept behind closed doors, right? Mm-hmm. And so I would say, bringing it out with some humor and a sense of, sort of making it a comical negotiation too between the husband and wife. Like it is very much like bringing it out into the light and telling people, this is life. This is the reality of things, right? I'm going to assume some of this is based on some degree of personal experience. It seems very much so. If you don't want to talk about it, that's totally fine. But this is something I think that's come up as a theme tonight. So have you? Well, first of all, do you consider yourself you write prose poetry and you write about spirituality as well. Is the rest of your work humorous as well, or is this sort of like a one-off?
So no, there is a thread of humor in my stories in particular. and I don't know if anybody who was with me in the Hopkins program is here, but, and I think a couple of my friends and critique group partners are on, and they can attest that even sometimes when I don't intend it, the humor works its way in. One of my other activities is performing improv comedy. And one of the things even though I think comedy is incredibly difficult and it sometimes scares the crap out of me, the beautiful thing about improv is that the element of surprise for everyone, including the performers. And I try to tap into that when I'm writing as well. And sometimes the way to get at really big, tough, hard truths is making it a little easier to swallow with some humor.
Sure.
And, people are distracted into absorbing it.
Yes, definitely. I think especially with topics that people would generally be uncomfortable about societally, whether it's, well, who knows, but certainly, unfortunately, you know, these particular matters of anatomy, right? It definitely helps to have a bit of humor. The other question I would have was there any conscious, I'm sorry, trains in tunnels? I have to ask, was that a conscious decision, or is this just the facts of a situation?
It started off simply as setting.
Okay.
And then, I mean, by the way, Rich, I'm very impressed with your close reading of everybody's work tonight, and I
thank you.
Appreciate your feedback and commentary, and you know, I appreciate your comment about word choice earlier because it was very intentional. And while the setting started off at a surface level, the more I thought about it and was playing around with the word choice, the more I drew those connections. So the answer is a little bit of both.
Okay, totally fair. I saw people commenting and I had to ask, also personal curiosity. Anyway, thank you so much. So more people can find out more about you at juliarocchi.com. They should go do so. And that brings us to a close. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you to Furious Gravity and Co. Some of the writers published in Furious Gravity, which again is the 9th installment in a series called Grace and Gravity. Everyone should go to Politics and Prose bookstore. Oh, I'll get there, Melissa. Hold on one second. If, however, that was for the people at home, you know what I mean. Maybe that was for the people on the phone in their bathroom at work, watching this on YouTube later. Right now, so here at TGI, we tend to hang out for a bit afterwards, and sometimes we have a little bit of fun. Sometimes we do trivia, sometimes we do all sorts of things. Melissa Scholes-Young has a copy of Furious Gravity that she is willing to give away to a participant in a home-based game of a scavenger hunt. So depending on the availability of certain items in your home, those items to be determined by TGI creator and tiny overlord Trina Thibodeau, you may be entitled to a free copy of this wonderful anthology. So I'm just going to say really quickly from all of us here, thank you. Thank you so much. You can find the easiest thing to do is A, find us on Twitter at TGIcast, and B, go to our new website, tgicast.com. And we are here every Friday night. We would really appreciate people coming back. This whole thing runs on recommendations and friendship. If you know people who you think might be a good fit or would like to come on, if you've already thought of somebody, that's awesome. Please reach out to our, she's the booker, but I have taken to calling her the Executive Vice President of Talent Relations, Noli Reed. Reach out to her either on Twitter, the email in the chat, or through our website, and she can hook your acquaintances up. Thank you all for participating. I'm going to hit stop recording now, and then